Bear with me a sec. I'll just share my screen. Okay, cool. Thanks, everyone. We can do it through the chat. Okay, awesome. Right. So hopefully. Okay, so in terms of today's session, we are we're going to talk about the other side of the personalised care coin, and this is a subject I think that has been of interest to me for several years, I guess, since I've been involved in self-direction. Is kind of like, how do we create platforms that people can use to manage their personal budgets in a way that kind of makes sense to them, but also balances the needs of commissioning, the needs of direct payments teams, around kind of risk as well. So Ian and I have been chatting probably for a couple of years on this subject area, really. And very recently, Chris, who's on the call as well with Ian, have created a white paper on this very subject. And I suggested that perhaps we do a webinar on it and see if we had interest from commissioners. And obviously quite a few of you guys have turned up, so which is a good sign, I think. So today's so just in terms of the intro to this is obviously part of our self-directed support network. We're now like a global network with 12 countries involved in promoting self-direction around the world. We've got over 1,000 members now, actually. That figure's just gone up. And we've got a really great and really sort of growing commissioner network with over 70 local authorities sat in it now. We have over 300 commissioners, which is magical. And our mission is really just to connect people together who want to reform the system and improve the system for disabled people and families, and shape the future of self-direction. Always doing a little shout out to all of our amazing sponsors that just basically, the sponsors help us keep running the network, and they provide support and funding that helps us basically bring stuff for you for free. So, okay, so we would have went around and done some quick introductions, but maybe you guys can just say hello in the chat, and maybe be really useful to know obviously who you are, which council you're from, and if there's anything that you want, particular burning issues from your perspective that you'd want to hear about or talk about, and then we can pick up some of those conversations afterwards. So Ian and Chris, who are going to introduce themselves shortly, are going to do a presentation, and then we'll have some time for a theoretical conversation afterwards, but it probably looks like at the moment it's going to have to be done through the chat bar. So, but please feel free to fire away questions into the chat, and I'll pick that up at the end. So, okay, I hope that's good with everybody. So I will hand over now to you, Ian, to do the intros.
Brilliant. I'm just going to share this this document, Chris. Can everybody see that?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I just saw Vicky Allen popped up on the screen. Hi, Vicky. So it looks like we may have some video tech as well back online. So
perfect.
Cool.
Okay, so I'll kick off. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks everybody for taking the time to spend with us today. So I'm just going to just really talk through governance and compliance in largely complex care. We look at this in two ways, from a complex perspective, but also a traditional sort of smaller budget social care perspective, which is already covered by other systems. But there are some significant risks around the more complex care, and we thought it'd be worthwhile to pick that up. Chris will introduce himself a little bit earlier on, but a little bit about my business, how we got here in terms of governance practice. I think it's worth just looking back at that, how it fits in terms of the NHS's 10-year plan for health. Chris will then work through a white paper that he prepared, which I found very interesting, around governance in this area. My own business have developed a solution, which I hope you don't mind me sharing with you, and then we'll just conclude, and any questions. All of these slides and the white paper are available to anybody on the call, or any of your colleagues. Just ask, or Sandra will send them out. So a little bit about Alacura. So although the company is 10 years old, this management team have been working together probably since around 2000, actually, and we bring very relevant experience in complex community delivered care, whether that's personal budgets, personal health budgets, or even commission care. On our management team includes the chief officer of a large, former chief officer of a large metropolitan borough council, actually two, the owner of a specialist learning disability provider, complex care charity trustees, and then on the other side of it, which is a bit that's interesting today, I think, is that we've got a couple of, including myself, M6 qualified supply chain and procurement professionals. And really, our focus has always been on the back office administration of these very complex areas. This is our third enterprise level system. The system I'll show you later on is Rostrata, but actually we've developed two other systems prior to that. The first was in construction for social housing, and the second one was an e-marketplace for more traditional, lower value social care called Shop for Support. Chris, I'll hand over.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Chris Williams. My background is public sector procurement. So I've spent over 15 years working for organisations like Crown Commercial Service, NHS Supply Chain, and that whole procurement cycle, from understanding what the market can deliver versus what buyers need, writing that intent documents, running the tender process, evaluating all those bids, sometimes moderating, awarding, and then managing those contracts or frameworks. And then 6-7 years ago, I set bid management services up, and that kind of includes procurement consultancy and helping suppliers win more work in the public sector. And that's kind of where the procurement expertise kind of came from, to try and share that and give commissioners, suppliers, more options than the traditional suppliers that kind of typically go and have the budgets for bid writing and things like that. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, so how we got here. So in terms of governance, if you look at current practice has been utilised in one form or another for a long time, including in the 70s, 80s and 90s for community delivered care. When personal budgets first started to come to the fore in the early 2000s, they were pretty small in social care, 3,000 to 5,000, very outcome based, and councils and local authorities adopted really the standard form of oversight in these personal budgets, if they were doing any oversight at all. So the money was paid up on a trust basis, very limited oversight, more outcome focused. Any audits that did take place, and we were sort of involved in some of these in the early stages, were very limited in scope, generally quite a long time after the actual activity had taken place, the expenditure. Totally manual. There are no systems. Even today, there are no systems involved in the audit process, and entirely focused on transactions, largely bank statements, actually. Sometimes if the budget was a little bit larger, there could be some timesheets involved, but mostly around bank statements. Those sort of audits, and we manage quite a large number of very complex budgets in a third-party way for other clients. We found them to be honestly quite inefficient, largely ineffective, and extremely costly for everybody. They're costly for commissioners because there's teams of people sat at desks spending hours and hours and hours looking through bank statements and other manual documentation. They're also extremely onerous and stressful for the care providers and the individuals. Quite often we were being audited 3 or 4 months after the actual care had been delivered, and digging back into those sort of timesheets to get timesheets and other information was often quite difficult. The current protest as well actually is probably a breach of standing financial orders. When I've looked at, and I looked at a few standing financial orders for local councils, and if you look at them, they're actually asking for three-way matching on things like contracts, orders, and so on and so forth. Chris will cover that a little bit more when he covers the work that he did. But actually, if you look at the process around compliance and governance of these types of budgets, then they are likely sitting outside of current standing financial orders. And there's a lot more scrutiny on this. I noticed a couple of the organisations who are attending today. You'll be in areas where things have started to become very public around the lack of governance around this area and the problems that's causing organisations. If you then look at the impacts of the Care Act through continuing healthcare, the introduction of a lot more complex budgets and much higher value. The average budgets of the average value of our budgets is around £275,000 a year, which is huge. But the problem is they're still audited in the same way that a £3,000 a year budget is audited. I'm not sort of talking about the care at the moment. I'm just talking about the governance. So we had a situation where we would receive a request for a £275,000 budget once every 3 or 4 months for some bank statements. And quite often that was all that was asked for. Really never, ever any correlation to the care plan, which is problematic from a governance perspective. There was a sort of a lack of proportionality. So very, very large budgets were treated exactly the same way that very, very low value budgets were treated. There's never been a system involved at all. It's always been manual. Can we provide bank statements to an individual who would then troll through them and try to make some sense of them? But it was really always focused on transactions, what's been spent, not what has the money been spent on. That creates the conditions for misuse. I mean, it's difficult to talk about some of this stuff when you're talking about care, but unfortunately you can see in the press that there's it's definitely the case that it creates the conditions for misuse, misspend, and even fraudulent activity from time to time. And also the risk in all of this sits entirely with commissioners, because generally speaking, these monies are paid up front. The onus sits with commissioners to get the money back if it's not spent, and to prove that that money needs to be returned. And there have been all sorts of problems around that, including some legal cases near to where we are. If we then look at the latest 10-year plan, I mean, I think there's probably a couple of 100,000 personal budgets, personal health budgets. There's a lot more personalised care and commission services, but in terms of personal budgets, the NHS and Streeton have announced that they want 1 million personal budgets by 2030. They've worked out that care delivered at home can deliver brilliant outcomes, which it can. But part of their core strategy for that is getting care from the hospital to the community and moving from analog to digital. That's going to cause all sorts of problems, by the way. The market's not set up to deliver a personal health budgets. But beyond that, in terms of the audit process, it's entirely inadequate. If you load the current audit sort of capacity with 1 million personal health budgets, it'll just fold over. You cannot audit and govern that sort of volume just in terms of teams of people. It's just too complex. The scale's too big. So really, from our perspective, it's you have to move to a more system-based approach, and it's not just systems, it's the whole way that people audit budgets needs to be looked at, and commissioners need to lead that process. It's not going to be led from the market. Care providers, there's a lot of them, most of them are extremely small. They're not going to lead the change, and also there's no benefit to them to lead the change. At the moment, there's a veil over this whole area of data, and there's no incentive for them to change anything in terms of what's happening at the moment. So that leadership needs to come really from commissioners, hence this session and the discussions that we've been having with Chris. There's also a financial issue, of course. I mean, this is an example. It's a an ICB. I've taken the name out, but essentially there are huge deficits in terms of forecast costs versus budgets, and they're not small, these, and a lot, it's not just the ICBs, a lot of the councils are running deficits too, and there's a real need to become more efficient with the use of money, not just in a cashable way, the direct savings that you could make from doing this in a different way could be up to 20%. That's what we've found. But there's also non-cashable savings. It takes us 5 minutes to audit a package of care. It takes a local council 6 weeks sometimes, depending upon the complexity. So it's really important that we consider both cashable and non-cashable savings. So I'm going to hand over to Chris for a couple of slides. Chris prepared a white paper which I found very interesting around this whole area. It's independent, so but I found that it correlated quite a lot with what we were talking about. Chris?
Thanks, Ian. So in terms of the white paper, just before we go into this kind of purchase to pay slide, it looked how personal budgets and packages are governed, paid for, and how it's all kind of checked from that perspective. And it was just looking at the systems and the processes rather than any kind of people from that side of things. And a lot of, I think, as Ian said, a lot of the kind of the processes are linked to kind of smaller valued kind of care packages, but times kind of moved on, and as part of this process there's a lot of kind of high value, high complex care packages that kind of are kind of coming into this bit. So I'm not arguing about kind of Chris Watson and I were kind of talking earlier about, we're not kind of discussing about kind of personalization. It's more around, is there sufficient evidence of everything that's kind of happened against that agreed kind of scope of works from that perspective. So the three kind of outcomes that we kind of looked at was better protection for the people that are getting or receiving the care, the better protection for public money. I think as Ian's slides have shown, how that kind of potentially can happen. What has been asked for, what has been received, and is there evidence through that process to make sure that's happened? And then also making sure there's protection for commissioners, and there's evidence to back up everything that's happened as part of that kind of care plan or that scope of work. So this slide that we're on screen now looks at a typical purchase to pay process. So in terms of a requisition, a sign off internally to say that goods or services can be approved for an order to be placed. Then a receipt of the goods to say, yes, we've received those goods or services. It could be a tick, but then that's kind of then triggering the invoice from the supplier. And then there's that kind of check to make sure that the invoice then matches the goods receipt, that matches the purchase order. There's then the payment, and then the kind of matching from that perspective. If you look at it in very kind of basic terms, if you think about buying a pen from Amazon, you kind of find the right pen based on quality, based on the price. You then place the order. You then receive the order in a couple of days potentially, and then the courier will take a photo of you, either it being delivered in your porch or where it's being delivered, and that's the kind of key fundamental part, that's the evidence that is being received. So that's kind of what we're saying here from an evidence perspective, the process for kind of purchasing a pen against the kind of the process for purchasing kind of care services, and evidencing that care that's been agreed has been evidenced effectively. Ian, can you move to the next slide, please? So here, what we're saying is around the current system, looking at it from a black and white perspective, is that it's on a trust-based system rather than physical evidence. And the impact or risk of that, it looks at financial, governance, safeguarding, and audit and reputation risk. So what we're saying from a money risk is that how do you know that the services that are being provided match what's being required? From a safeguarding risk, how do you know that the care that's being asked for has been delivered to that agreed care plan? If from a reputation perspective, if there's an issue later down the line, how do you know, how can you back that process up? As Ian said, potentially you're relying on 3 or 4 months later, invoice transactions, but how do you know what care has been delivered for that visit if there's an issue the next day? That's what we're saying here. So a lot of the evidence isn't done in an instant or even, within 24, 48 hours. As Ian said, it's a lot around potentially bank transactions or requests made 6 to 12 months after that care delivery has happened. So it could be that we're not talking here about trusting people. It's more about, is there a robust process in place? Ian, next slide, please. So here we can kind of see the kind of where the gaps are that we've been kind of talking about with the last couple of slides. You have the information at the start of the process. You know what care has been planned and you know what budget has been agreed. And then you have the information at the end of the process. You can see kind of the payments that have been made, the transactions or the invoice. But the key bit here, and it's circled on the slide, is the information that sits in the middle. What has actually happened against that care plan? Was the care plan delivered? Was it delivered at the right time? Was it delivered by the right person with the right qualifications? Was the right level of support needed? So at the moment, as Ian was alluding to as well, the information is held in a number of different places. It's in the supplier system, potentially paper timesheets, payroll records, invoices, and emails, which makes, if there's an issue, for the commissioner to try and find the information that they need in a quick and robust way, there's a massive gap. That also means that you're trying to manage a complex care without real-time view of actually the delivery and what's happened. And going back to that previous slide where we talked about financial risk, safeguarding risk, this is where it becomes real. Because if something is missed, reduced, or delivered incorrectly, we're not just talking about an admin burden, we're talking about kind of a personal issue. So this is why we're not talking about banking systems or payment cards and things like that. It's looking at that evidence, and that's where the gap is in terms of what the white paper kind of found from what we looked at. Ian, that's kind of everything on that slide. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so if we just look back at that slide, that there's a whole piece of data that's missing that commissioners are locked out of, and it's that fundamentally needs to change from a governance perspective. You wouldn't see this lack of goodness. I've never seen it in any other sector I've worked in, and I've worked in quite a few. The fact that there's more compliance and governance on the purchase of a pen on Amazon than there is in the delivery of a £275,000 care package it's quite shocking to me, actually, in terms of the lack of governance. And I think the problem is continuing to try to use the same process that's been used for the last 50 years to improve a situation. Just hasn't worked. And you've got a scenario now where you've got these very ad hoc manual processes without systems trying to monitor very, very complex packages of care, and it just doesn't work. And I think the losses and risk associated with that are huge for commissioners. So we've been working for quite a while on a solution for that. And it's always difficult, this, isn't it? Because sometimes when you want a different outcome, it's really important that you do something a bit differently. So we created a system called Rostata. It fits perfectly with the NHS's plan around moving from analog to digital. At its heart, it's a rostering system, smart rostering system, but it's much more than that. And it doesn't just roster against individuals and scheduling. It manages the financial aspect of cases as well. So it's a common system for complex, higher value care delivered in community settings. Why does it need to be common? Because there's a single data set. It's very difficult to create multiple user interfaces from different systems. So instead of trying to get information from a provider system, it's doing what's done in other areas of healthcare. Honestly, it's getting the provider to use the system that you define. Rostrar is a framework system. It's cloud-based and it's collaborative. In other words, it's open to the commissioner and the provider. It's a proper, true open book system. The data in it is common, it's activity-based, and it's constantly comparing care delivered actual to the care plan in real time. So at any point in time, for any package, for any individual, a commissioner can go in and see where they're up to. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a second. It's entirely proportional. So it manages by exception. So if, for instance, if a package of care is getting delivered as per the care plan without any variation to it, generally speaking, you can see it, but it doesn't flag it up. However, if there is an issue with the care plan, then the system will flag it up and say to you, you need to go and have a look at this, over, under delivery, different competency, location issues and things like that. The point about the system is it transfers the risk and onus onto the care provider and away from the commissioner. It's a big point that actually, because at the moment the risk all sits with you. You're the ones that have to get the money back. You're the ones that have to get the timesheets and troll through them. With the system, it works the other way around. So because it creates the invoices for the care providers, they can only invoice against what's at the care plan unless any variation has been pre-approved. So it puts the risk on them to basically seek approval for any activity that doesn't hit the care plan. That's important from a care quality perspective, but also from a financial perspective. Beyond the fact that you're asking providers to use a common system, it's actually pretty straightforward as well. It's the provider that uses a system on a day-to-day basis, but it's the commissioner that uses the information to manage the framework, and that should benefit all parties. That's a sort of it's a static view, unfortunately. The dashboards aren't static, they're interactive. But the first thing to say about it is that's our audit compliance report, by the way. So this is all real data, but test data, so it's totally anonymized. The first thing to say is everything's built around the individual's NHS number. That's the number that you can see there. It means that the data is very clean because everything's built around a validated NHS number. If any of the data is around the employee, it's around the national insurance number. What you've got with a lot of systems is because the data is based upon names, addresses, people, you tend to find that it can be very dirty. You can't analyze it properly because there's lots of errors in it. Not in ours, it's very clean because it's around validated numbers. That's a summary of the actual budget. So in that particular year, for example, it's £112,000 budget. 29,000 of that has been spent, 33,000 of it needs to be returned, and there's 49,000 of it left to spend. That's very straightforward. That allows you to do two things: either go and get the money if you're not leaving it in the budget, or if a commissioner's really clever about it, actually, they could just balance off the next payment against what remains in the account and just manage, never ever go and try to get money back. Just don't pay it out in the first place. Just reconcile everything against the activity. The system's comparing this in real time all the time. So that number will change on a daily basis as care is getting delivered. And then at the bottom is the detail. If you need to go into anything in any detail, those are all the timesheet information that you can analyse if you've got a discussion to be had with a care provider. That level of information, you can't get it in a manual process. It just takes too long. That would probably, in order to get that up, takes a few seconds. To get that level of information through a manual audit, I couldn't imagine how long that would take. It's 100% automated, this process. And as I said to you, it only really flags up to you those packages that are problematic. Anything that's running as per the plan is fine. What we found is with the providers that we're using this with, is that it changes behaviour a little bit. They know that we can see the information, so therefore that they are working exactly to the care plan, not outside of it. And if they want to do anything different than the care plan, they're generally asking us well in advance, because they run the risk of not getting paid, which is this transfer of risk that we talked about. This is one report. There's 22 reports on the live system. There's, at the end of this presentation, there's examples of 4 or 5, but there's a lot. There's, shift allocation, support plan utilisation, gross profit reports at the provider level, all the sorts of reports that you'd need to manage your marketplace in an open book way. What does that mean? It means that you start to become best in class in terms of the whole process. So it creates a match between, it's called a purchase order here, but the contract, the service that's delivered, and the payments that are made. All of those things are matched fully in Rostrata. It's a fraction of the cost of having 20 people sat there looking at bank statements. It runs to about 0.3% of the cost of the average budget, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending upon the value of the budget, because it's a license fee. But it's miles cheaper than the teams of people that you've got sat looking at budgets. It provides 100% assurance. It's not at this point interested in the cash or the transaction. It's interested in the plan and the care that's delivered against that plan. And that gives you 100% assurance that what you're asking to get delivered is getting delivered by the level of competency that you require at the time that is set out in the care and support plan. And it's analysed in real time. So every time you look at a particular package or a particular situation, it will have changed from the day before, because it's operating in real time. So the system provides that proportionate sort of evidence base, as opposed to trust-based procurement that we've currently got. So we've flicked through them pretty quickly, haven't we? But just in terms of a general conclusion, and then happy to take any questions, honestly. Current governance processes, I think it's difficult to say that they work on the current low volumes. If the NHS's strategies are to come into play, there is no way on that the current practices could manage the volumes that are coming, but they don't work anyway on these very complex packages. There are some structural weaknesses in the process around the purchase to pay process. I've never seen anything like it in any sector I've ever worked in. To have this level of money governed by this low level of compliance is just highly unusual. I'm assuming Chris is the same.
Yeah, in terms of kind of some of the organisations that I've worked across, it did seem a stark kind of contrast, particularly for the amounts of money that are involved as well, and the kind of risks that we've identified this morning.
Yeah. The assurance, around essentially getting the care that's set out. I mean, most contracts on complex, I mean, you've got to define complex, haven't you? But most packages of care that have got over £25,000, say, will have a care plan attached to it, I'm sure. And the contracts associated with that will require the individual or the care provider, if it's an ISF, to only spend the money on what's in the care plan. The problem for you all is you've got to go and check that. You can't just trust that that happens. You have to go and check it. That's part of your corporate financial order regime. Doing this also meets the move from analog to digital. We're using processes here that are 40, 50 years old. It's time to automate these on a system. That requires leadership. Moving care providers onto a common platform for rostering and scheduling. They'll already have their own systems, but moving them onto a common system so that you've got a common data set so that you can manage your whole framework of providers in one place is really, really important if we're to move this area forward. It transfers the risk wholly from commissioners to providers. It's really important. In other sectors, in terms of governance, very little money changes hands before a proof of receipt. And this basically requires that a care provider delivers to the care plan. Otherwise, they're going to get that particular activity put into query and they run the risk of not getting paid. That risk is really important because it changes behaviour. There are significant savings here. On our packages, up to 20% on the package. I'm happy to run through that in more detail if it helps people, of cashable savings. And if you automate this process and take out the resource required through the teams of people, then there are significant non-cashable and administrative savings as well. A system like Restart is part of that solution, but it's not all of it. It needs different framework settings and commercial arrangements to make it work properly. Chris, I think that's us. I've left a few slides in here, by the way, on the types of reports that you can see in there, from the plan budget summary, gross margin, supplier utilisation, and so on and so forth. But they're there for you to look at if you want to. If anybody wants a login to the live test stand so that you can go and see the interactive reports, I'm really happy if you contact me directly or through Chris. I'm really happy to provide a log on so that you can go and have a play around with the test data. The test data we've got is actual complex plans, but they're from the past, but totally anonymized. So yeah, happy to take questions, or Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian and Chris. Yeah, very interesting. So if anybody has got a question, I haven't seen anybody pop anything in the chat. Theoretically, camera and mic may well be on now. So if anybody has anything they want to kind of put out there, yeah, or just drop it in the chat if it's easier. I guess the thing that always comes up in my mind, Ian, with this stuff is, with my little commissioning brain, is thinking about the kind of costs of the platform, but also I know you spoke about like cashable savings and stuff like that, and I know you've got some examples of that, like real life examples of where the platform's kind of come in and done that. Is there anything that you could speak to around that to just sort of give us a bit more detail about what it can do? Yeah, so
when we were first developing the platform, we were managing very complex budgets manually. And there were a lot of instances of, so we were having to do the audit manually in the same way that a lot of the councils do it. So we tried to set up this matching process within our audit process, and we found multiple instances of organisations invoicing care that hadn't been delivered. So we would always check back with individuals whether or not care, and you see it in the press all the time, Chris, honestly, you see reports of it all the time. Invoicing for care that's only, my doorbell's about to go off. I do apologise to everybody, but so invoicing for, do apologise for that. And again, so invoicing for care that's not been delivered, invoicing for care that's only partially delivered, a lot of instances, invoicing care delivered at the wrong competency level. So staff going in that weren't qualified to provide the care and keeping the charge rate. When we first launched the system, and this isn't the fault of the care providers at times, with a few, one particular situation always stands out where the carer clocked on the app at 10 o'clock in the right place, the right town, clocked off 5 hours later. Perfect. 5-hour shift. The problem is they were 80 miles away. So things like location-based stuff and all of that stuff happened. People may have also picked up on what happened with Vibrance Care in the Southeast. There's a couple of Southeast organisations here. This was a care company unfortunately went into administration late last year. They had 15 care homes which had been struggling. And in the administrator's report, they were found to be moving personal budget money into the care home business to support it. It went down with £11 million worth of personal budget money missing. And the real shocker in all of that were there were 12 commissioners who didn't see any of it. £11 million, didn't see any of it, didn't pick it up. One of the commissioners was actually still trying to contract with the company as it was in administration. And that I think there were 4 ICBs and 8 local authorities. And as I said, none of them picked it up because their audit processes couldn't pick it up. So, there's lots and lots of examples of that. The other way you can use the system as well is in terms of creating care and support plans, because they're commercialised in the system. You can see right from the get-go what they're going to cost. And smart commissioning is definitely one of the benefits of automating a lot of this process.
Okay, thanks, Ian. There's a couple of questions in the chat there. So Patrick's coming there. I don't know if you want to have a look at that. But it basically is if Rostrata system requires a care provider to take on the risk of over delivery and seek approval in advance, what prevents them from trying to compress the service into the agreed time, preventing the risk of increased cost to them, potentially reducing the quality of the service? Alternatively, how can you ensure that providers aren't stopping the service once they would have to assume risk, regardless of outcomes, ultimately driving the service back into a time and task mentality because they need prior approval to go over the time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it doesn't, honestly, it doesn't stop that, but it makes it visible to people. I think that the Rostrata isn't going to solve the issues of this marketplace. What it does is it makes everything transparent so that you can see it and operate it. I mean, we have numerous conversations with local councils, and it's not unusual for councils to say, well, yeah, we don't take the underspend back because we leave it there within the budget so that there's a flexibility to do other things. I mean, when you've got a contract that says deliver as per the care plan, that needs to be checked. And any time that there's money left over from that because of underdelivery or any other reason, there should be the opportunity for you to make a decision about that. And at the moment, that's not there all the time. So it just provides the transparency for you to be able to manage the issues, not and nothing more than that in the end. But also, I mean, just going back to the specific point, that on very complex packages of care, you'd want to know that the care plan's being delivered. You just want to know it, because otherwise, having the care plans, it was not worth having the care plan, is it? Clive, did that pick that up? Did that answer that?
Patrick, I don't know if he's on the line still, but
Yeah.
yes, got it. Thank you. Yeah, just Patrick, that's great. So
Thank you.
I had another question in just from Helen. Just a couple of things. Obviously, she wouldn't mind having a look at the test data, so she's popped her email in there. But also, just asking about an indicative cost understanding. So how this works, I guess, from a council perspective, financially, in terms of your fee model.
Yeah. So the average cost across the care packages we manage is, I mean, we develop this for complex care. There are other systems out there for very low value budgets and low value direct payments. This wouldn't be the system for that. You can't, you can't manage. There's such a variety in the types of packages that you can't manage them with just one system. So for lower value packages, people could or should continue to use things like purchasing cards. There's the virtual wallet system that PPL created is brilliant. But for larger packages, this is where this sits. It operates on a license fee, Helen. So it's per user, per active user per month. And the average is about 0.3% on the budgets that we manage. If the budgets are much lower, it could be 0.6% of the budgets. If they're much higher, it can be as low as 0.2, 0.25. But it's very low. It's always under 1% of the value of the budget. So if you look at that versus the benefits in terms of the visibility and the savings that it generates, it's self-financing many times over. But I'm happy to sort of work with you and provide a bit more detail on your higher value cases.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's cool. So I'll come. Claire's just last question, but Helen's just following up just in terms of what do you deem to be a high cost package threshold? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a really good question because I'd be interested in everybody's view on that, honestly, because our lowest value package at the moment on the system would be 30,000 per annum. But as I said, but equally, we've got packages of care at between £400,000 and £500,000 per year. I think it's an interesting question, Chris. I think it's definitely would be worth getting people's thoughts on that.
There's probably a median package cost for everybody who's using social care services, and then I guess if it's an outlier above that, you might start to think statistically that would be a higher cost package.
I think it's also an individual LA thing, honestly. When you look at local authorities, some people might set it lower or higher than that. I think I think it'd be nice to get a generic view of what the market thinks. But if you look at all age continuing healthcare, I mean, it's not 25,000. I mean, quite often what's happening now a lot. I mean, one of the benefits of the system is we've got quite a lot of all age continuing healthcare on there. And what happens with it is you'll generally find that there's an amount of budget funded by the NHS for that care plan, and then the local authority will maybe add £5,000 or £6,000 of pure personal budget spend that can be based on for outcomes for that individual to use to benefit their outcomes and so on. So there's the system manages split budgets as well, very well. It apportions the individual activities to the organisation that's funding. I've just seen a question in there around the software. So when a care plan's written, Laura, what happens is that we take that care plan and we commercialise it in the system. So we would although it's in Mosaic, it can be imported into the system and then we'll commercialise it. That then gets emailed back out to the commissioner or commissioners if it's multi-funding streams for approval. And then once it's approved, we set it live on the system and we import all the care providers staff details, and then we start setting up the roster templates for the care package. So the simple answer is yes. It's an open system, and we can create interfaces into most care plan software and e-brokerage software. Just one point about it, managing the cash. So at the moment we manage the cash in Sage, but as of September this year, you'll manage all the cash within the system. We're just finishing off the budget management module, which means that you can reconcile everything in the system. So everything will be in one place from September. At the moment, the cash we manage in a separate system. It just means you've got a little bit of work to do offline. But as I say, from September, you can do it all in. We're just finishing off a budget management module that will sit on top of it. It'll work perfectly for things like ISFs, where you've got care providers managing the cash for you. You'll be able to go in and look at exactly where they are in terms of the physical cash at any one point in time. If it was me, from a procurement perspective, I would make the first payment in the first quarter. I would constantly check how that was getting delivered against the plan. On average, all of our plans under-deliver by about 15% for all sorts of reasons, but they never 100% deliver. And I would use the balance of cash and reconcile it against the next payments in the next quarter. I would never look into a situation where I was never asking for money back off a care provider, because it's difficult to get hold of it, as you've all found out. I'm sure over time.
There's a couple in there's one in there from Claire that's a bit further up about the individual, and obviously if it's their direct payment, NHS or local authority, how does that, and they don't, and the council, the NHS, ICB, so they don't directly contract with the organisation delivering care and support, how does that kind of interface? Or does this only really work with ISF's third-party personnel budgets? I think it's probably linking to Laura's question.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, we've got one package where the individual roster's on the system, so the individual can use the system in the same way that a team manager would on a thing. It brings up a whole other question, doesn't it, around the suitability of direct payments for large value packages. But that's a whole other question. I accept that. But the individual uses it in the same way that a care provider would. When you've got a care plan and a contract attached to it that requires activity being delivered in line with the care plan, then you would utilize a system, and the individual can use it in the same way that a care provider would. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, just pick out a bit, I guess, Laura's bit around do you think your platform mostly targets third-party PHPs and ISFs, or sort of direct payments as well? Have you got a sort of target audience for this?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Just one second. Just Clay, I've just read the full question actually. I think it's my view again. I think governance and compliance to care plans strengthens personalisation. It doesn't constrain it. I think there's this general idea that that governance is a constraint on personalised care, and it's not. If you get to a situation where you've got complex packages, higher value packages, and you are managing them properly, that will sort of engender better outcomes for the individual generally. And then, sorry, going back to that question, Chris, can you just repeat it for 1 second?
Yes, I think, yeah,
I've got it.
Your primary. Yeah.
Honestly, yes. My sense here is that ISF take-up's been very, very slow. And I do think that, on higher value packages, ISFs are a much, much better solution for the whole situation, individual and commissioner, than direct payments. I think direct payments were designed around lower, smaller value budgets. And, if you think about a budget of £275,000 a year, for example, which is our average, divide that by 12 and think about a direct payment, that is a ton of money for an individual to manage. I'm not saying that people can't, but you need to be able to oversight that properly as a commissioner.
Yeah, excellent. Cool. Right, okay. I think people are starting to log out now. So we're exactly bang on 12 o'clock. So just to say thank you, Ian and Chris, for coming along and sharing your insights today. Very interesting. So we will be sharing the slides afterwards. There's a few people asking about that. We will pop out the white paper as well. We'll email that out to folks, and we will post a video of this, probably without the technical issues at the front end, on our LinkedIn page, and we'll share a link to that as well, so everybody can share that with colleagues. But yeah, hopefully you found that session useful. Really lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming along, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Take care.
everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.